Ida B. Wells was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi in 1862 at the end of slavery, and at an age of 16, the yellow fever had killed both her parents and a sibling. It was in spite of all this that she would grow up to be one of the most groundbreaking investigative journalists in all of America. Being a black woman in early America, her accomplishments would be made in the face of a lot of racism and sexism resulting in the suppression of her voice, an issue that despite more than 100 years of racial injustice is still around today. Ida B. Wells was able to spread her anti-lynching and anti-racist messages through the powerful medium of journalism. This can be seen with Ida's work against white mobs and hate groups by spreading the truthful and awful information about racially motivated lynchings, especially in the South. Famously, she said, "The way to right wrongs is to shine the light of truth upon them." It was this attitude towards journalism that would make her a crucial, yet overlooked part of the history of battling against racism in the United States.
In 1892, 3 friends of Ida B. Wells were victims of 2 racially motivated attacks. Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Henry Stewart were owners of People's Grocery Company. The small grocery store had quote-unquote taken away customers from competing white businesses. In the first attack, the owners fought back against the attackers, shooting one of them in self-defense. This landed the owners in jail for the shooting. But it was in the second attack when the lynch mob broke into a jail, dragged them away from the town, and horrifically murdered the 3 men. This moment was a groundbreaking point in Ida B. Wells' life that created even more drive in fighting civil rights and justice through journalism.
Ida B. Wells wrote many books, including The Red Record, Southern Horrors, Arkansas Race Riot, and Lynch Law in Georgia. The Red Record was a documented statistical report about lynching with a lot of research. Wells went very in-depth about how innocent people were killed and denied due process of law. She also exposed how lynching was used to continue white supremacy and breaks down the typical justifications for lynchings, including the supposed threats of race riots that could occur if black people were treated fairly. Crusade for Justice, the autobiography of Ida B. Wells, was published in 1970, almost 40 years after her death, and was edited by her daughter. She used her books to spread awareness with evidence about lynchings and to try to convince others to take the same position and to actively be against lynchings.
One of Ida B. Wells Barnett's most well-known and at that time controversial causes was the awareness she spread about lynching. Wells Barnett wrote many articles and books about lynching, some of which caused huge outrage. The outrage from these writings caused riots, and angry racists threatened to lynch Wells Barnett herself if she continued spreading the truth of these events. The books Wells Barnett wrote about lynching, The Red Record and Southern Horrors, Lynch Law in all its phases among them, were compiled of statistics, specific experiences, and an assortment of other research that Wells Barnett compiled. The predominant white reasoning for the lynching of black men was that the man had raped a white woman. However, as Wells Barnett proved in her books and articles, this was often a scapegoat for unfounded racism and hatred. She proved how many black men who were lynched under the scapegoat of rape had not even been charged with the offense. Many of the black men persecuted had not taken advantage of white women, but rather had been in consensual interracial relationships. In fact, most of the rape being committed during this time was by white men and done to black women, an issue that was widely ignored by society. Wells Barnett also shared the constant efforts by white people to revoke the rights of black people. Altogether, Wells Barnett's extensive research served to inform the general public of the racism, hatred, and scapegoating behind lynching. She used the media to spread awareness and to make known the true racist nature of lynching to people who may have previously thought lynching was a fair execution of justice or something morally correct, which was something that many people at this time believed.
In 1892, the executives of a black newspaper named the Memphis Free Speech asked Ida B. Wells to come write for them. She accepted, but on one condition. She would have to be made the co-owner of the Memphis Free Speech, and thus the first black woman in America to be the co-owner of a newspaper. With her newfound platform, Ida would go on to focus solely on her writing and more than double the newspaper's readers. The Memphis Free Speech became a trusted news outlet for the black people of Memphis who relied on Ida to be a public voice against racism and lynching. Ida was able to take a stand against the mistreatment of blacks in Memphis. This was a massive deal, as she would serve as a voice for the largely voiceless. No one else was fighting for black people in the same way she was able to, which made it all the more important that she was able to become a voice of truth. This was incredibly dangerous, and she had to risk her life every day just to find out the truth, let alone publish it. Additionally, Wells organized powerful boycotts of the racist establishments in Memphis. Notably, the streetcar line in Memphis pleaded with the Memphis Free Speech newspaper to end the boycott, and when Ida asked why they thought the boycott was happening, they said that they thought black people were afraid of electricity. Wells wrote another article to be published the next day saying to keep up the boycott. Ida told readers that they don't have to suffer through the brutal racism they were facing every day. She told people to move further west to safer places like Oklahoma and Kansas, and people listened. Hundreds of African Americans left Memphis. Ida's words undoubtedly saved black lives from lynchings with this. Her use of the media inflicted not only anti-racist change, but also showed her community that there was a reason to fight.
In 1883, Ida was thrown off of a first-class train car that she had a ticket for. After this, she sued the Chesapeake, Ohio and Southwestern Railroad Company for damages. When she first filed suit, she had Thomas Castles as her lawyer. However, she fired him when he dropped the suit and she thought he had been paid off by the train company. Next, she hired James Greer, who was a former Union officer. They won the case in December 1884 in circuit court. He had argued that 2 Tennessee statutes had been violated. 1, railroads couldn't charge black people first-class fares and then seat them in second-class cars. And 2, that conditions for black people and white people were supposed to be separate but equal. Even though Plessy versus Ferguson hadn't happened yet, this was still a Tennessee state law at the time. In the end, Ida won $500, but the circuit court's decision was later reversed by the Tennessee Supreme Court. This case got a lot of media attention. For example, in the Memphis Appeal Avalanche, which was also known as the Memphis Daily Appeal or the Commercial Appeal, which was a fairly popular newspaper at the time.
Ida B. Wells Barnett was also an activist for women's rights and more specifically women's suffrage. The most well-known activists of the women's suffrage movement are white women, and the movement was actually racist. The mainstream women's suffrage movement refused to include race issues in their campaigns and ignored the struggles and challenges that black women faced. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony excluded black suffragists in their books and works, and suffrage parades and conventions were segregated often. Ida B. Wells Barnett took part in the first women's suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. in 1913. She was told to move to a segregated section, but she refused. Wells Barnett helped found the National Association of Colored Women and the Alpha Suffrage Group. The National Association of Colored Women, founded in 1896, advocated for women's rights and suffrage while advocating to uplift African Americans in society to equality. The Alpha Suffrage Group, founded by Wells Barnett in 1920, was an organization that fought for the right to vote for specifically black women. The more specific goals of the Alpha Suffrage Group were to protect the votes of black women and to use those votes to elect black politicians. Wells Barnett fought for the black women's vote even after the 19th Amendment was passed by fighting against the various kinds of voter fraud which were preventing black women's votes from going through. Wells Barnett used the media to help black women get and later exercise their right to vote. Specifically, she helped the Alpha Suffrage Group educate black women on the political process and how they could vote through educational writings about civic matters. Suffrage organizations at that time spread their messages through educational pamphlets, newspapers, and magazines. There were many of these received by a large audience. Wells Barnett helped to create these organizations to educate, inform, and empower.
Ida B. Wells went on to give speeches in America and abroad educating the public about racism and civil liberties. Wells also ran for senator in Chicago, continuing to advocate for others through politics. Throughout Ida's life, she always fought for equality, whether it be racial, gender, or etc. Through publicating papers, giving speeches, and doing every little thing she could, Ida is a great example of what we as people can do to fight racism and strive closer to becoming anti-racists.